Hi everyone, and welcome to our book launch this evening. My name's Jasmine and I'm from Carcanet Press, and I am very happy to welcome you here tonight. Of course, we are here to launch Carola Luther's new collection, On the Way to Jerusalem Farm. Thank you all for being here. Carola is here with us. We are also joined by Linda Anderson, who's going to chat with Carola in a little while. To just give you a bit of context, Linda is a poet and academic. She was formerly the Professor of English and American Literature at Newcastle University. There she founded the Newcastle Centre for the Literary Arts and the Newcastle Poetry Festival. And currently she's the chair of Blood Axe Books. So that's very exciting that she's here with us. You can read her own poetry collection, The Station Before. That's out with Pavilion Poetry at the moment, and it was just shortlisted for the Seamus Heaney Prize. So go and check her out if you don't know her work. And thanks to her for being here. I will invite her on screen in just one sec to introduce Carola properly and to introduce the book. But before I do that, I just want to tell you what's going to happen this evening. So you're probably familiar with Carcanet events already, but to just run over the schedule, we'll be together for about 1 hour. Obviously we can't see you. I can see that you have found the chat, which is very cool. Keep your messages coming in. If you haven't found it, please say hello to us there. Let us know what you think of the reading. Let us know your thoughts about the book and everything else. That's great that we can hear from you. Later on, we want to hear from you in a different way. So as well as the chat, please do find the Q&A box. Linda will be able to read some of your questions to Carola and we can get you involved in the conversation. So if you bring that box up, you can just get your questions entered in there for later on. Obviously you've paid £2. Thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate it. I did put the link in the chat earlier and I'll give you that later on so that you can buy a discounted copy of the book. So we'll deal with all of those things later on. But for now, I think that we should have a poetry reading. So I'm going to invite Linda on screen to join me and we'll begin.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. It's my very great pleasure to be here this evening introducing Carola Luther on the occasion of the publication of her wonderful collection, On the Way to Jerusalem Farm. Carola has previously published 2 collections, both with Carcanet, Walking the Animals, which was shortlisted for the Forward First Collection Prize, and Arguing with Malarkey. She's been poet in residence at the Wordsworth Trust and has also written for theatre. She was brought up in rural South Africa and moved to the UK in 1981. She now lives in Yorkshire. Carola is a poet of acute and luminous observations who makes us see in new and unusual ways, not just what is there, but also what may be there in the gaps between, the spaces of suspension. In her haunting and haunted landscapes, there are presences, creaturely presences, and she's always aware of the proximity, it seems to me, and kinship between the human and the non-human. This new collection is expansive and exploratory and generous, both thematically and formally. The journey it takes the reader on is full of vivid moments in the here and now, which also have a tendency to slide off into strange hinterlands. One place leads to another, and something is happening too in the white spaces on the page where there are no words, so look out for that. Voices and conversations abound, but they're diverse and fragmentary. These poems are both profound and mysterious, and the whole collection is moving, revelatory, tender, and disturbing in the best possible way, as all good poetry must be. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Carola read a selection of her poems now, but really all of you also need to read the whole book. So I'll hand over to Carola now to read some poems to us.
Linda, that was such a generous introduction, and I can't thank you enough. Also for agreeing to host this. You know, it's a big privilege for me. And before I start reading, I just wanted to say thank you to Carcanet, to Michael Schmidt and all the people, including Jazz, working behind the scenes, who have helped bring this book out into the world, and particularly John McAuliffe, who has edited for me and has been just a joy to work with. So thank you, John. I'd like to thank all of you who are here tonight. I can't see you, but I just have seen lots of things popping up on the chat, and I just feel wonderful that you're all here. And it takes more than one person often to write a book. And those of you who've had part of it know about that. And lastly, I'd like just to thank my family who are here. Welcome. I'm so pleased you're here. And actually, it's not finally, because I want to dedicate this reading to my partner, Sheila, who's been so stalwart and patient through the writing. Thank you. Okay. There are 6 sections in the book, and they're bookended by 2 poems. I'm going to read both of those poems, but I'm going to begin with the first poem in the book, which is called Campfire. How the cattle move across the sun-scorched field like marquees of Hannibal, how the cattle lower their heads to water touched by floating summer powder, how the cattle leave their muzzles floating there, as if they too are seeds or dust, as if they wait not quite to drink, but to absorb the other trance-eyed cow they nuzzle nose to nose, and the water, how the cattle osmose drowsiness, a deja vu of twilight from the trough, while the water level in it drops and drops, how the cattle turn back across the hot-cropped field to pitch their tents around the grass edge, as if these last green flames are campfire, and tomorrow they'll be gone. The next poem I'm going to read is in the first section, and the section is called Letters to Resul. It's a sequence, and this is the second poem in the sequence. But because it was actually written first, I'm going to read it because it was a sort of when I got to the end of it, I knew I had to write more. It's written in the voice of the speaker who is wandering from coast to coast in the near future through depleted landscapes, searching for Resul. So I will read on Finding the Way. Now I've turned the corner, I can see her, Resul, the architect of sands gazing at her small city. It looks Moroccan, and not just because it's the color of lions. This beach might be my longing or yours, but this morning I woke on it face down. The tide had receded, and the sand beneath me was cold and hard. Standing, I saw no dog, no bird, no woman or man, and from the flat sea, which could have been Mercury, nothing breached, no rock or whale spout or hoop of dolphin, not even a fiberglass boat. I recalled no one had seen fish for decades. I miss you, Resul. I started to compose a prayer. It was difficult. The art of it struck me as more important than I could understand. And in my search to pinpoint the precise keen tone to mourn for sand fleas and mollusks, I found myself on my knees, marveling at minutiae of quartz and sea-rubbed plastic. and it was then that I saw them. A sandpiper's footprints, so faint from certain angles, I lost them in light. And I remembered how shorebirds used to run between waves, and on their way in and on their way out, the waves did not always wash away imprints. 3 wire toes, arrow after arrow, pointing to where the bird had run from, where I should go. Who would not weep, Resul? I followed directions and turned back, walked east around the headlands. And now I can see her, her white shirt flapping in the crook of the bay. She is crouching down, brown hands at work on her next suburb. I imagine small arched windows, walls bleached pale, almost pink, like shells or salt pan camels. The next poem I'm going to read is called The Fugitives, and that's in a different section of the book. We stumble from the forest, spruce at our backs, minatory and dark as an unknown police force. We find a path, but it winds up at a quarry. It could be our bombed street. You panic at the rock, but the sun comes out and we see blue swirls in the granite, atolls of lichen, ochering light. New grass nestles our feet and the grass smells like ghee after days of deprivation. I say, in this handkerchief of meadow between quarry and hectares of government pine, here, old love, shall we rest? I see you drink in a place that has everything anyone might need, its hiatus of sunlight we could name as our own. Let's sit, I say, before you begin to cry again. No, let's doze, allow ourselves one small summer. So we lie in our bodies and are silent. Then you say, wildflowers like bright-clothed shoppers. And I say, shifty willow, hopeful birch. And you say, clouds like ruminants. No, like neighbors, joggers, market stall holders, jacketed people walking normally to work in sun, people in rush hour traffic taking children to school, like children at school, like, and I say, hush now, darling, hush. Don't let's talk. After a while you sleep, your breath a small animal in undergrowth, transporting seeds. And I feel the span of seconds widen immeasurably. Forget buildings that staggered to their knees, the hanging rooms, the shells exploding. Birdsong, today is a million minuscule bells, falling and falling through air. And air is a bowl of God, so deep and blue, I never do hear the small bells land. And through my eyelashes, I watch mayflies like Sufis ecstatically spinning above a makeshift pond. A 10-day puddle, really, filled with spring rain. A water lily leaf unrolls a boat there, 3 reeds becoming the oar of its dream. There are lots of birds in this book, and they sort of move through the longer poems particularly, but I've also got a couple of tiny little poems about birds, and they will be the next ones that I read. Greylag. Get out my way. Out the way, Khan, 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 get out the way, out, got to get out, Khan, Khan, get out the way, get out, Khan, got to get out, vandaag, Today, veranderen, veranderen, verander, veranderen, veranderen. The next poem is called Ren. Ruatele, Drolin, Ren. Your song, liquid sugar on my tongue. Elan, chi, 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 churu, chi, chi, chi. Okay, so the next poem I'm going to read, or the next two poems actually come from a pamphlet that was published when I was in the Lake District by the wonderful Wordsworth Trust and edited by Andrew Forster. So I'm going to read two poems from this section. Before the map. At night I feel at home with these hills. They lie down beside me like cattle in the dirt they are in. I call them in the dark and they shift like cattle do. Sangha cows or Highland cows like kine, like kin. I know I'm not the only one. Secretly at night they settle down by each of us, keep us warm and in. These are the names I give them. Kith, worm, saf, ox, gert, brute, plow, set, olifant, cough, olifant, bone. And the next poem from that section is called Sheep. The hill could be sky with its snow. The sky does nothing, nothing. Under my feet, the road is narrow, reels forth frozen to the horizon, gaily, darkly, as if remembering a lorry full of boys going to war. Why do I laugh out loud when a sheep comes into view, galloping behind the sound of its own clattering? Something about that sheep is awry. It runs towards me, sheep-like, but unsheep-like. Wool distracted, dainty high heels undone, horn without thought, shoved on. Here it comes, hurtling down as if it might jump into my arms. The intimacy of terror, it's not going to stop. Those lake eyes say, oh God, the hill's collapsed. Or please, someone, anyone, tell me, what is my name? I'm moving house in 10 days, and the reason I decided to read that poem is because I feel a little bit like that sheep, I have to say. Okay. The next poem is called Dear Suddenly and is really about the sort of immediate act of perception, I think. Dear Suddenly there, 2, no 3, launching to get away. Shh, shh, shh. Leap line interrupted by trees, beach no birch between us and light, stammering like shutters, no film clips, clip. Dear Suddenly stopped. In the pixelation and confusion of brush, they pretend to be memories. Images intuited in black and white, passengers on a platform silent with suitcases, portmanteau, valise. No, suitcases and trunks. There they go, vaulting landscape. No, let them be landscape. No, carriages of trains flickering behind landscape. No, trees behind trees. Clip. Now they are trees. Trees or stones with height and weight. Greenwood columns say in chapels built for a green man. A green man. No piskies, no Picts, no Celts. Oh, dear God. Dear God. The wind, its empty coat hung in the trees. And the next poem I'm going to read, I can't see it because it hasn't yet come up onto my screen, but here it is now. And these next three poems are were written in the early part of lockdown, in that very extraordinary, disturbing, distressing spring. And my house that I live in at the moment, when I wake up, I can look out and there's a wooded hill and the sky always changing. So this is called Morning Lies Along the Hill, and it's a bit of a love poem, really. Morning lies along the hill, lover waking slowly, half folded in cloud. Purple and orange haze balanced on the tips of rough hay wood has disappeared overnight. Now trees rediscover the greens they can be. I think of you waking in another house, sunlight, your body, stored all through this bright and lamenting spring, coming off you, a light of your own that you rest in and will leave behind. If I could touch it, the light would be almost warm as you, following shape close to the shapes you have been as you slept, like leaves becoming just above the woods. Today is blue like blue used to be. I could almost ignore the fields, pale as sponges, the exhausted trees, stunned but upright. Horses stand side on to the sun, either asleep or watching steam rise, the whitish grass. Still as tables laid with cloth and bowls of warm food, they don't move a muscle. They don't want to ruin it. Flowers are tougher than they look. Crocuses push up their soft torpedoes while daffodils yell at the sun. Building continues. Bony crow nests shake high up, twig knots loud on the sky. Trees will remember. It's the beech trees gingerly hanging out blossom of grey tatty plastic I want to talk to. Perhaps they and the horses understand facts I've only half grasped. Being human, I hope, it might go something like this. When we are finished, first them, then us, or maybe the other way round. There won't be redemption exactly, but days of a kind, ugly and heavenly as this. What we know. The horses have gone and come and gone. On this farm, they bloomed brief as errands. We laid our foreheads against their flanks and breathed in the beginnings of ourselves, hay sweet and salt sweat and the afternoon smell of hot wood. Our old man reported that what had returned to him was the shape of horses forming through mist. They had stood there like nurses waiting for stretchers coming in from the fields. He said as he passed, they forgave him. They forgave us all, he said. They lowered their lordly muzzles and breathed. And now he could forgive us also. For what? I asked. But these days I wonder, if the possibility of horses is almost extinct in us, through all the poison and cleanliness, it is hard to be calm. Thank you.
Thank you, Carola. That was an absolutely stunningly beautiful reading. Really, I'm so moved by it. And I wanted to take you back to the beginning, actually. I wanted to take you back to that first poem, Campfire, which you've given a kind of, I suppose, special place to, cutting it off from the rest of the book, right, placing it at the beginning as you have. And I wondered if there was, I mean, it's a very meditative poem, and yet there's that sense of transitoriness about the landscape at the end. And I wondered how far that was a kind of originary landscape for you, because it seems to be a place of merging, of bodily merging, as it were. You know, it feels like a very early state of being, and I wonder if there's a sense in which that landscape was encapsulating something very special for you about your origins.
Yes and no, but I think that's how these things always work in a way. In fact, the poem began watching cattle here in the UK on a hot, really, one of those summers where there's, you know, all the grass is gone, it's hot, and everybody, all the cattle like to go under trees or go where the grass is looking greener. But having said that, the feel of the cattle and the knowledge of the cattle is something sort of a little bit in my body, because of course where I grew up there was cattle, and they were big and gentle and hot. Yeah, so yes and no.
Yes, yes, and those animals run through the poems, don't they? Not just the cattle, but the sheep, the oddly dementing sheep, and the horses in that last poem that you read. The sense of those animal presences seem very important in the poems. Carola, I wondered if you wanted to say something about that.
I sort of, you know, where I grew up was near the Kruger Park, and while this book feels very very British in a sense, it feels very here in lots of ways. I guess there is something about being in the presence of animals which is so sort of magical, and in the somehow, I don't know, it sort of does something to the very core of one, really. And I think that's where I sort of learned to look, and also the sort of invasion of looking as well, that sort of sense of the sort of right we feel we have to just keep observing and photographing and you know, looking and tagging animals and their own sort of secret life, I think, is the thing which was magical for me as a child, and I think still is. And I think that's true for probably everybody, feels the same.
Yeah, there's a sense, maybe particularly in that What We Know poem, where the word forgiveness comes up. A sense maybe of, you know, what are we doing? What right have we to interfere, as it were, in with animal life, with nature. Is that something that you want to come through the poems, as it were? That there's such a wonderful celebratory sense of nature, but there's also a kind of anxiety about, who am I and what am I doing here in relation to this world?
Yeah. Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I was asked to write a little blog entry for this book, and in that I talk about how in my lifetime, I'm sure this isn't actually true, but it feels true to me, my sense of the natural world has gone from this immense, powerful, potent, far bigger than me thing to something that is fragile and so in retreat, and it's like we've got all the power, sort of thing. And I know it isn't like that, but that is the feel for me, I suppose, is that there has been a big turnaround.
And in some of the poems, there is a kind of sense of mourning, isn't there? It's an unspecified grief, as it were. It's there in the Resul poem that you read, on finding the way, isn't it?
Yeah.
That sense of, and you introduced it as this was a ruined landscape that you were moving across, and I suppose the bombs and the ruined streets, they occur in other poems too, don't they? So as well as it's the natural world, which is so strongly present at the edges of it, as it were, is a kind of world of violence. And
yes. I think yes, I think that is right. There's something about that, I don't know. It's something about almost, well, the kind of harmony and almost sacredness, I suppose, of a sort of unruined natural world, but also that's a bit of a lie in a way, because underneath there's always been destruction going on, and in a way it's that, in a way that's what Jerusalem Farm for me is that it's both this thing which is sacred to many people and yet full of fracture and violence and oppression, and that's what South Africa was like. It was both idyllic and profoundly insane and violent as well.
And thinking about your title and about Jerusalem Farm, I understand that's an actual place in
It is. It's a
kind of serendipity. There's a kind of finding of metaphor then, or symbolism even, within an actual landscape. It gives, as it were, meaning to you. The landscape gives meaning, as it were, without you trying to impose it on it. Would that be true to your sense of what's happening when you're writing about a landscape?
Well,
you saw that place, Jerusalem Farm.
Yeah.
You thought, well, that's a gift, really, for me.
Well, no, I'm not nearly as clever as that, Linda. I just genuinely wrote, it was just, the poem it occurs, I haven't read tonight, but I was genuinely walking to Jerusalem Farm, which is this beautiful little nature reserve in Calderdale with a campsite on it. And it was only quite a long, I felt very fulfilled by the name in a way, or it was beautiful. It was a beautiful name. And then I suppose slowly, it just began to open up for me as a, but no, I wasn't, no, I'm not that clever, as I said.
I noticed in the blog that you've written on the Carcanet site that you wrote about how Yorkshire seemed very familiar to you when you settled there, and you traced that back to reading Ted Hughes in your growing up, your literary education, as it were. And I thought that was very interesting, because I wonder if it's possible to write or to approach landscape, or to engage with language without these other voices, as it were, coming in. I mean, I couldn't but notice Elizabeth Bishop, for instance, in your Resul poem, with the sandpiper and so on.
Absolutely.
So do these things just happen because they're part of your store, as it were, your intellectual store?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Because often, there's a poem also I didn't read tonight, but where I wrote the whole poem, and just as I was coming to the end of the poem, I suddenly thought, my God, I've stolen this idea from D.H. Lawrence. And so I had to end the poem by saying that, everything is from everybody else. That's why I sort of feel I didn't write this book on my own, because I've had so much help, from obviously poets before, but also poets in my region who helped me so much too. And yeah.
Is it important to you that there are other people in the poems? There are interlocutors. I mean, there's Resul, as it were, running through that sequence of poems, but it's very often a we, isn't it? Or there's snatches of bits of conversation coming into the poems. So, I mean, this isn't you being solitary in a landscape, is it? The landscape is also an occasion for engagement.
Yes.
With people, not just animals, but with people too.
Yes. It's always dodgy, I think, to use we, because who am I to talk for other people? But actually, often I have a sort of sense of who I'm talking about. And, it might be family members or friends, or it might just be, well, like sort of almost imaginary figments of my imagination, but who are somehow occupying an idea, or that they just sort of personified something in my in my mind for that time.
I mean, sometimes I almost got a feel of kind of Virginia Woolf's kind of wanting to weave together the outer and the inner, the bits of fragments of conversation. Our heads are full of different things all the time, which kind of coexist. Memories coexist with being in the present, and with looking and seeing. It makes a kind of richness, a kind of sense of a consciousness which is never kind of still, but having to work and understand and gather things all the time. I mean, I started off saying the first poem was meditative, and a lot of the poems are meditative, but there's quite a lot of movement in the book as well.
Yes. I think you're talking about Virginia Woolf, and there's something about stream of consciousness which sort of I enjoy, because it allows me to bring in everything and work out why afterwards. And sometimes I can, and sometimes I can't, and I have to chuck the poem away. But yes, but you know, the thing about it feels to me like going through the day or something. You know, something will remind me of something from the past or from a different geography, or I'll suddenly hear a voice, you know, that reminds me of somebody, or, you know, all of these things, don't they? They go in to make our poems. You know, I think, I'm sure that's true for most of us.
I was struck by how much listening there is in these poems, actually, and your how you try to represent sounds. You know, it's in your bird poems, for instance, but in other poems too. You know, you're almost, language won't quite do it, or English language won't quite do it. You turn to other languages sometimes, or you make up, you try to represent sounds. I wonder, say a little bit about that. I think it's fantastic, and as you read them, they're so.
Well, Linda, that's kind of you to say. I think the thing about using more than one language is not because I'm a linguist. I really am not. But there was sometimes this sort of particular phrasing, for example, that you hear in a bird call that sort of brings back a linguistic equivalent that you remember or something, you know, and it's fun to play with those things. It's certainly not original. I mean, you know, jug and all of that, you know, but it's fun. And I think the thing about different languages is that I suppose those poems were mostly written round about sort of Brexit and things. And there's something about the sort of borderlessness. You know, no bird belongs to one nation or to, you know, and there's something about that. It can be any sound, any human language. And of course, none of it belongs to the bird, really, you know. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if I've answered your question there.
No, it's just very interesting, and you know, it's certainly a kind of feature of the book. It runs through a lot of the poems, this kind of effort to represent sound.
Yes.
In language, and it requires almost a breaking across a part of words in order to try and do it. And there are other examples too where you break words apart. You're wanting to make them work differently, as it were, make us see new things in the words.
Yes, the one comes to mind, which is in a poem I didn't read, which is the word fecund. And it was such a gift, and I divided because there's something quite sensual about aspects of that poem, and it became feck, and then cund, feck, cund, and that maybe is the sort of thing you're talking about. But that, yeah, it's lovely fun, that stuff.
And you know, just thinking about the technical things a little bit. You often, and the poem you're going to read right at the end, actually, make use of you know, long lines, don't you? And it adds to that exploratory feel to the poems. You know, that there isn't a kind of end. There isn't a final shape, as it were, but it's always a movement towards something rather than arriving at. Did you have any kind of sense of that as you were, you know, developing your long lines in some of the poems? I know we talked about the American tradition a little bit.
Yes.
Together before, and how that appealed to you in a way because of the sense of space, I suppose, and
the sense of space and discovery, you know, that I wasn't being hemmed in by a form, but discovering a form, which for me is the joy, really, of writing. I don't always succeed in doing it, but sometimes a line for me, if it can bear it, if it is tight enough somehow, you know, if you can keep the idea going and going and going, it does something quite calming, it feels to me, in a way. You know, there's you know, the shorter lines very often are much more exciting and beautiful, whereas the long are maybe more meandering or something, and sometimes that's appropriate. And then in other poems, like I think the one I'm going to read you're talking about, actually in some ways it's almost like a concrete poem, or, you know, like where I'm actually representing, you know, something wide and low, or I've had another one with seascapes and skyscapes, which is all about layers and similar things. So sometimes it's a sort of visual thing, yes. And sometimes it's a sort of tonal thing, I guess, registered.
There's some questions coming up, Carola, which I'll try to relay to you at the moment. When do your poems come to you? What's the most fertile time of day or night? Do they come when you are moving or still?
When I'm moving.
When you're moving. Right.
When I'm moving. So very often it'll be when I'm walking or on my bike. I've got a bike which I love. And yeah, so it's when I'm moving. And maybe not a poem, because again, you know, I'm not, but it's sometimes it's just a sound or a phrase or something which just catches my eye, ugly or beautiful, whatever it is, that I sort of find words for, just a phrase or something. And then if I remember it and I write it down later, then I sort of will start from there maybe. So I don't sort of have a poem altogether sort of thing in my head.
Do you use notebooks? Do you make use of notebooks? Or do you go back to old notebooks? Or?
Yes, I try to. I do try to. The trouble is I very often don't have a notebook on me when I want one. And then it's all basically up to the thing I find, you know, my mind, which is a bit like a sieve. But yes, I do try to write things down because I will forget them, you know, and I'm just not very disciplined about carrying a notebook around, as I say.
Here's another question to you, Carola, about your methods. In some of your poems, you make use of white space, indents, visual pauses. How do you decide on the placement with those? Do you try over a draft aloud and try to map the sounds pauses on the page? And then in brackets, absolutely gorgeous poems too.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you. Well, I think I do. I maybe don't map them, but as I go over and over a poem, if I'm reading it in my head, particularly if I'm not using punctuation, which I don't do in two of the longer sort of sequences, I use the white space partly to modulate the meaning and modulate the rhythm and the pacing. Yeah, and I think that's what everybody does, and then leave gaps as well, sometimes for breath, sometimes instead, sometimes if you've got no punctuation, it really does matter after a while if you're going to make sense of something where you put it. So it's kind of trial and error. And as poor Andrew Latimer will know, who typeset all these poems for me, I changed my mind quite a lot with some which I hadn't got quite right, and he was so patient and kind in helping me get that right.
There's a question here, Carola, about your animals again. Your poem about animals needing privacy seems to me central to your ethos. Is that in this book?
It is in this book, but I didn't read it because it's very long. Yes, what do I think? I suppose somewhere this thing about animals is that, on one level, I'm just like everybody else. I eat eggs. I'm not. But there is a part of me that if I let myself sort of feel what they're feeling, it's a bit like letting ourselves feel what humans feel. It can become very difficult to see how we are more important than them. And yeah.
A word for me that comes across very strongly through your poems is this sense of this kinship. This, you talk about kin, kith, don't you? But the sense of we're all the same. We're part of each other, as it were.
Part of each other.
Yes.
I believe that. Yeah.
Yes. There are lots of really lovely things coming up in the chat, Carola, which I hope you get a chance to look at, including someone saying you're one of the best readers in the world.
Thank you.
So, if there aren't any more questions from anyone, I wonder if this is the moment to hear you read again, Carola.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you so much for your sort of such thoughtful and thought-provoking questions.
Well, thank you for this wonderful book, Carola.
Thank you. Okay, so just seeing if I have to click something. No. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this poem is about an ancient and rather beautiful and surprising church in Grasmere called St. Oswald's Church. And I think I'd like to read this for my brothers, who I hope are watching. Layers, priors and befores in the walls, storage of prayer, but also something earlier, shifting strata of human, crow or rock cow. Patience like the first act of building, sweat and wattle, ivy sap plaited by builder into pilings and branch beams, the new cut lats. Shelter for all, pebble, fur, straw, currachs of mud stuffed in and scraped, dung, sorrel sweet, stuffed in and scraped, slate scraped, smoothed to a finish. The burnish of ordure and rubbing along. Shepherd, stock stealer, nomad, farmer. Later the mystics, though the heart of this church is a buyer. Functional, it has the herder's temporary architecture. wide as a house for wintering beasts and tenders of beasts. Pasture, valley, lake. Afterthought, a good place. Burgeoned with faith and the habit of gathering. Built onto, built up on, consecrated by a saint, it crumbles and remains permanent. And under the sacrament, under services, tours, meditations of historians and Sunday churchgoers, under each flagstone walked shiny by feet, thud, shift, far away lowing, close up pelt priest, press, stink fleece, animal heat, the walls of a stable, a Mercian fold, always going on, the springing in. And there, half hidden in the rushes of the stalls, a woman and a man. Imagine, she's thin. He has dirt smeared on his cheek. Daub has spattered their garments, stained palms, hands to the wrists, the soles and tops of their feet. In her brown arms, she holds a child, exhausted, peaceful as trees, man and woman sleep. The child opens its eyes, stares into our eyes, amused, awake. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carola. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Carola, thank you for these beautiful readings. It was so good to hear you read those poems. And thanks, Linda, for hosting and for giving us such an interesting conversation. And thanks to you guys for getting involved so well. Your messages in the chat have been so uplifting and your questions are great. So thanks to everybody and congratulations to Carola on the new book. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this launch this evening. So yeah, just thanks to everyone. I can't thank you enough. So please buy the book. You must now go and buy the book. I'm going to put the link and the discount code for you in the chat now. You can save that for later or you can ignore it and it'll come as an email tomorrow. And if you have any difficulty getting your book with the discount code, get in touch with me and we can help you from Carcanet. So the last thing that remains to be said is please join us again. Next week we are launching Jane Duran's new collection, The Clarity of Distant Things, with Moniza Alvi, and all the details are on the website, so go and have a look for that. So as ever, I will leave the chat open for a couple more minutes so you can get your last minute messages in there. But thanks again everyone for being here. It's been a lovely evening. So thanks and good night.